I want to share. I want to share some maths with you today. Bet you didn't have that as the thing I was going to start with this morning, did you? I want to share some maths with you. I love maths because you can truly count on it. This up on the screen here is called a bell curve, or some of you might know it as a normal distribution curve or some other similar sort of name. It's meant to measure the frequency or how often something happens. The distribution of events based on observations from nature and psychology. In many ways, it's the most important probability distribution in all of statistics because data can be, when it's often compiled and mapped, it looks like this on a screen. It tells us that most events happen in the middle, around the average, and that those events become far less when they get further away from the middle. It's kind of a pretty simple sort of thing. So, for example, in Australia, the average height of a woman is about 1.62 metre, and for a man, it's about 1.76 metre. Most people are kind of grouped around that height. The further you get away from it, the less people there are. Makes kind of sense, doesn't it? In a normal distribution curve, around 2/3 of the people, 2 out of every 3 people, is kind of right sort of near that middle. And something like 95 to 99% of people are not too far away from it. It's a very, very small number of people who tend to be a long way away from the middle. And normally when we graph this sort of event, the people are on this side and on this side kind of balance each other out. That would be kind of normal. But sometimes they don't look like that. So for example, if we were to say, what's the average income in Australia? Now this might shock you, but the Australian Bureau of Statistics would tell us that the average income in Australia is about $90,000. All right? But $90,000 doesn't mean that it's all balanced on this side and on this side, because if you can imagine on this side, well, it's hard to earn less than zero, but there's a numbers of people who earn a lot more than that. So it's kind of skewed, it's kind of out of balance. I can sense the excitement in the room right now. I can feel the vibe. I can feel the sense of, Andrew, I got out of bed on this Easter Sunday. It's a long weekend, and you're bringing us maths. I can sense the joy. If you're a student, you're saying, I haven't been at school for a week, and I'm so excited to have some more maths in my life. If you're older than that, and you're going, I haven't studied maths for so long, but it's great to have this refreshed in my heart. I suspect that if I was to graph interest in this sermon at the moment, it would be heavily skewed on the I'm engaged, not I'm on the board side of it. But you're ready for, here's the interesting part. I wonder what a graph would look like if we tried to measure how much I like change. I wonder what it would look like if you said, I like change. Let's do a little quick exercise here, all right? You did this if you were here about a month ago, with a school principal who was here sharing about work. So I thought I would kind of remind people about that. So what I want you to do is I want you to hold your hand up, one hand up in the air, not yet. And if you have a factor of 1, I want you to put 1 finger up. And if it's 5, I want you to put 5 up, all right? So if you love change, I want you to put 5 up. But if you hate change, I want you to put 1 up. If you're in the middle, maybe 2 or 3. Can you show me what sort of your response would be? Yeah, there's quite a lot of rude gestures coming from people this morning. Maybe that's how you're measuring this talk. You know what? A lot of us are resistant to change, aren't we? I mean, we think change is good. Change is good when it's like for technology. Or change is good for when my football team is losing. But change is maybe not so good for me. I mean, why is that? Is it because we think, well, my life is perfect. I've got everything together. In fact, when I look around the world, you know what? I wouldn't change a thing. It's exactly how I hoped and planned the world would be. Maybe not. The truth is, I think that maybe most of us feel like there's a need for change, but we're kind of resistant to it, aren't we? What would your reasons be if I asked you why you don't like change? Why is it so hard to change even though we might kind of want it? Well, here's my kind of list I kind of compiled during the last couple of weeks. I think for some of us, we don't like change because we have a fear of the unknown. A fear of the unknown. This is the I know I need change, but I'm too scared. There's a door labelled change, and we cannot see what's on the other side of it, so I don't want to walk through it. I'm in a job that drains the life out of me, but what if I can't get another job? Will I invest in a new relationship? Well, what if I'm rejected? I'm afraid of what's on the other side of the door. And so I will put up with some of the disasters, some of the struggles or whatever of life because I'm too scared of the unknown on the other side. Or maybe the reason that we don't like change is because we go down this camp. We go, I've tried, Andrew, and I've failed. This is I know I need to change, but it's just not going to work. I'm sure you understand that. Psychology today listed a number of reasons why they think that happens from their psychological experiments. They said that many people, when they try to bring about change, are motivated by negative emotions. We think that I'm fearful, I'm ashamed of something, I'm guilty about something, but their studies tell them that that's the most ineffective way, the most ineffective reason for wanting change. They say it's much better to be motivated by positive emotions rather than by negative emotions. They say sometimes people take an all or nothing approach to change. It's the reason why gym memberships explode in January but are empty and unused in March, because I'm all in, but as soon as I'm not all in, I'm out. And sometimes they say that people are afraid to change because we try to change too much. We try to eat the elephant in one bite. Some people are afraid of change because, well, frankly, we don't have the tools that we need to know how to change. I have a friend who says that she's given up smoking 14 times. Doesn't feel like she's got the tools to change. Sometimes people underestimate the process of change, what's required in it, and so they head off blindly into it and then fail and then give up. Some people fail to recognise that failure is simply a normal part of life, and so it's impossible for them to change. The third reason that I had down for myself was that why it's so hard to change is because I wrote down comfort is a safe place. This is I know I need to change, but I can't get off the couch. Kind of comfort and complacency. Now, it's easy for us to forget that change is kind of a constant in life. I mean, think how easy it is to make a change and then revert to the previous situation. Yeah, I think of my weight. I recognise that my body is not in the shape it was when I was younger. At times I feel like a boab tree. Not that boab tree, more like this boab tree is the one I kind of feel like I fit like. The problem is that I store a lot more than water in my belly of the trunk, right? So what happens? You work hard, you eat right, you're doing okay, you get in better shape. You think the job's done. And then you I don't need to worry anymore. The problem is that when you kind of slack off the need for change, my default is not where I want it to be. And you revert back. I kind of wish like my weight, for example, would be a pendulum, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, it goes up and it goes down, but it kind of settles in the middle exactly where it's meant to be. The problem is, in the middle is kind of where my weight tends to be. And it gravitates, doesn't it? And it's not where you want it to be. You're kind of stuck there. Or maybe you think about this in different situations. Maybe you live in a house and you resolve to look after, to improve your garden. You book in a few Saturdays, you work hard, you mow the lawns, you weed the beds, you plant some new shrubs, and you sit back and admire your work. I've done a great job. And we hope that it will stay that way. But you know what happens, don't you? You go away for a few weekends, you're on a holiday, you're busy, and pretty soon it starts to look like this. And you go, why doesn't it stay the same? Because the need for change is constant, isn't it? There's always something about trying to keep it in the right position. And that's the same true in many areas of life. You think about your most important relationships. They all require constant monitoring and feeding and changing. Think about what happens within ourselves. We all face struggles and weaknesses and temptations. We're kind of working on them constantly. But when we think that we've made a change and that's it and I never need to do it again, I'm done, I sit back with my propensity for comfort and complacency, then we fall into struggle again, don't we? The truth is that most of us live with some degree of discontentment all the time. We kind of know, we recognise that within us we're not completely satisfied. And at times we feel defeated or frustrated. And eventually, often the time, we kind of give up. Can't be bothered. Doesn't seem to urge, and I'll get around it tomorrow. You see, change is always needed, even though it's not always desired. You know, today is Resurrection Sunday, a day we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. In Luke 24, there's another recording of this resurrection. It says early on the Sunday morning, the women went to the tomb, taking the spices they prepared. They found the stone rolled away. They went in but couldn't find the body of Jesus. Stood there puzzled, an angel appears to them. They're terrified. They bow with their faces to the ground. The angels ask, "Why are you looking among the dead for someone who is alive? He isn't here. He's risen from the dead. Remember what he told you. The Son of Man must be betrayed into the hands of sinful men, must be crucified and rise again on the third day." Then they remember this and they went and told. Well, here is what I want to say, my simple message for each of us today. An encounter with the risen Jesus changes everything. An encounter with the risen Jesus changes everything. And in a place where we need change constantly, where we need to move from our places of complacency or our place of fear or our place of failure, here is the greatest change that you can ever experience in your life. I want to share from the lives of 3 snapshots of people what happens. One of the first people to meet Jesus is Thomas. I'm glad that Thomas wasn't alive now, because he would feel labelled all of his life. He has been defined through the ages as Doubting Thomas. In John 20 it tells us one of the 12, this guy Thomas, he wasn't around with the others when Jesus first encounters them. So they told him, "We've seen the Lord." But he replied, "I won't believe it." And that is how he is known throughout history. I won't believe it. In many ways, Thomas is hard done by. I mean, he was simply expressing what the others had felt in their time. I mean, after Jesus' death, they were all hiding away behind locked doors in their homes because they were afraid of what the people who had crucified Jesus were going to get them and what they were going to do to them. They were in exactly the same position, but because Thomas wasn't there, he has now been labelled throughout history as Doubting Thomas. Many people I know feel like that. Many people I know feel like they've still got a part of themselves that is defined by some part of their life story. I have a good friend of mine who was incredibly mischievous as a child, constantly in trouble with teachers, school principals. But if you were to meet him now, you would say, well, there's a middle-aged man. He's a lovely young man, responsible. He's got kids, a wife, a steady job. He's in a house, a very responsible. But within him is this little boy that always feels like he's in trouble. People won't let him, who have known him all his life, won't let him kind of grow up. They look at him and see the little naughty boy. I wonder if Thomas felt like that, if people labelled him. 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus is standing among them. "Peace be with you," he said. Then he says to Thomas, put your finger here. Look at my hands. Put your hand in the wound in my side. And don't be faithless any longer. And he says this word very simply. He says, believe. The opposite of doubt. Believe. You see, an encounter with Jesus, an encounter with the risen Jesus, changes everything for Thomas. History tells us that Thomas travelled far outside the Roman Empire as a missionary in his life, probably as far away as India to preach the gospel, responsible for planting the first churches. An encounter with the risen Jesus changes everything. For Thomas, it moved him from doubt to belief. Or what about Peter? You know, I love Peter because I identify with him. Peter, rash personality, not thinking about consequences. I mean, on one particular stormy night in his life, he was caught at sea in a small boat with his friends, the disciples. They were filled with fear. And then there is this miracle that happens. They see Jesus walking on the water towards the boat. And all of them are kind of like, but Peter, not Peter, because he is the open your mouth before doing anything. He's the one who, I'm there at the first impulse, you know what I mean? Like he's the kid putting his hand up first in class. So he says, Jesus, if it's you, call me. And as soon as Jesus says it, he jumps out of the boat, starts to walk towards him before he looks around and gets scared. That's Peter. You've got to love him. He's all in at the first bell. He jumps in, boots and all. I mean, Peter is not the type of person that you would call steady Eddie. He's not the person described in the school yearbook as most reliable in a crisis. If he's working for you in your company, you don't appoint him as the Occ Health and Safety Officer. You don't ask him to design a bridge because it will be really quickly done, but it will fall over because he won't have thought about all the things that could go wrong. Peter, or as he was known in the first part of his life, Simon. In fact, the word Simon kind of means to be heard. And that's Peter. He's lifting up his voice all the time. Before the crucifixion, and Jesus had gathered his closest followers around him, and he told them that they would deny him. But Peter, he wouldn't take it because he's rash and opening his mouth. Everybody else might, but not me. And yet, seemingly minutes later, he's denied Jesus 3 times. Well, the Gospel of John records how after Jesus was executed on Easter Friday, Peter gives up, hangs up his discipleship mantle, goes back to being a fisherman. But then comes his moment. In John 21, it says, the disciple who loved Jesus, that's the disciple John, says to Peter, it's the Lord. And when Simon Peter heard that he put on his tunic, for he'd been stripped bare for work, jumped into the water and headed to shore. There he is again, jumping. And he has an encounter with the risen Jesus. And it changes everything. He goes back in the midst of his discouragement and despair to what he knew best, fishing. But when he encounters Jesus again, he becomes again a fisherman of men rather than fish. An encounter with the risen Jesus changes everything for him. You can read about his life after these events, all through the book of Acts. The history of the early church. This impulsive but fearful man who ran away from a slave girl eventually becomes a leader who stands up against the Roman and the religious leaders, who brings radical change to the church through incredibly difficult times, fighting against cultural sort of mores and beliefs. He's jailed as he speaks against a King Herod Agrippa for his faith. This is Peter, the one who becomes the rock of the early church. You see, an encounter with the risen Jesus changes everything. The fleeing disciple turns into a fearless follower. the fearless disciple becomes a great follower. Final one I want to share with you this morning is about Paul. In Acts chapter 9, it talks about his early life. Paul, who at this stage of his life is called Saul, says, Saul was uttering threats with every breath, was eager to kill the Lord's followers, so he went to the high priest. He requested letters addressed to the synagogues in Damascus, asking for their cooperation in the arrest of any followers of the way he found there. He wanted to bring them, both men and women, back to Jerusalem in chains. Here's Paul, the enemy of the church, compiling a hit list. That's all it is, a hit list. As he was approaching Damascus on this mission, a light from heaven suddenly shone down around him. He fell to the ground, heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. And the voice replied, I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting. It encapsulates his story. Saul, the hitman, in a sense of the religious powers, carrying out his business, going about it with intent, with fear. People would shake in their boots when he would come around. And yet, on his way to a new job, bang, an encounter with the risen Jesus changes everything. Saul will change his name to Paul to signify this change, because once where there has been the death-bringing, fire-breathing Saul, now we have this agent of life. Where once we have the name Saul, a name attached with fear, now it becomes Paul, who's the one who brings hope. An encounter with the risen Jesus changes everything. And that's my simple message for you today. It's my message for me, for each one of us. You know, each one of us knows that deep within ourselves, that life is not perfect. Things are not how they should be. The world is not what we hope for. And it is normal for us to be afraid of making changes. Normal to feel like we can't go there, it's too difficult. And maybe for some of us here today, maybe you exactly feel that way. You long for something better, but you feel defeated. The only change that you've ever been able to accomplish as you look over the past year is maybe to change the clocks during daylight savings. But our invitation for you today is very simple. Encounter the risen Jesus. And you might say to me, Andrew, I cannot encounter the physical Jesus. You're talking about disciples who were there right then, but I'm not. I'm here in the 2020s. But I want to say the same way that Saul encountered Jesus, you can. Because if we believe that the Jesus of the Gospels, the Jesus of the Bible, the Jesus who is the divine Son of God, if he has been resurrected to life, we can encounter him today. And so I invite you to encounter this Jesus. I invite you, if you are filled with fear, to take a brave step through the door of uncertainty and say, Jesus, please show yourself to me. Maybe it's something like, Jesus, please help me to believe the way that Thomas did. Jesus, please change my life the way that Saul did. Because that's the great hope of Easter. The great hope of Easter. New physical life for Jesus, new resurrection life, new life for everyone who will trust and put their hope in him. Death does not have to prevail. Sin and darkness does not have to prevail. What can prevail hope and life and forgiveness in Jesus. You see, an encounter with the risen Jesus changes everything. It's changed the lives of millions of people. And I invite you today to let it change your life. I'm going to pray right now, and we're going to sing in a moment or two. But as we're praying, I'm just going to give just a little bit of space, 20, 30 seconds. And maybe during that time, you want to take that opportunity to pray yourself. And your prayer might be something very simple. God, please let me encounter the risen Jesus. Let's do that now. I invite you just to bow your heads and close your eyes. For our God, we know that there are many things that fill our hearts today. There are fears about our world, fears about our relationships, fears for the people that we love, fears for ourselves. We know that we have this desire, at times it feels like it's an unquenched thirst for something better, to hope in something that is eternal. And our God, we are reminded today that is found in the risen Jesus. For the promises of Easter Sunday is that death can be defeated, that guilt and fear and shame will be overcome. But our God, at many times we do doubt like Thomas. We fear like Peter. And so, our God, we would simply pray, please show yourself to us. Help us to encounter the risen Jesus. Help us to be able to see as Paul saw, and to know that you are alive.